All right, so my name is Emily Hay, and I am the Family Advocacy Program Manager for USAREC. I know those of you on live with me know me, but I want to make sure that those who are watching our recording later on YouTube know who I am. So thank you today for joining us for communicating with your child, and I appreciate those of you who are on here as USAREC staff for allowing me to record today's session so our families can view this later. So we are, of course, talking about how you're going to communicate with your child. And I know most of you have probably had a class, read a book, read a blog about communication. And I think most of us probably really heavily look at communicating with our spouse or our significant other when we talk about communication. But it's so important we implement those good practices with our kids as well and help build that healthy relationship with them. So looking at communication, how would you describe good communication? And you can come on audio or you can type in the chat. Let me know what would be a good description of that. You can use a word, write a little paragraph, your short little definition, whatever you prefer. So listening well, yeah, it absolutely involves listening. Anything else? And I think communication too, it's not only that listening, so listening to what the other person is saying, but also being clear and when you are speaking as well, right? To be clear with your expectations, with what you're trying to communicate, so that on your end, as the one talking, that they're receiving and understanding what you're saying. And not be distracted, absolutely. Distraction can definitely play a big part in what communication looks like and whether it's received or not. And then what would be a consequence of poor communication? Like if you're not communicating well with your kids, what would be a consequence of that? So if you didn't communicate boundaries or expectations well, then your kids probably wouldn't realize what those boundaries are, right? Like for instance, if your boundary is only 30 minutes of screen time, but you just told them that they had limited time and didn't tell them the exact amount, that would be poor communication. They wouldn't know what your expectation was. So it's so important that we have good, healthy communication with our children. It not only builds a positive parent and child relationship, but it really gives them that sense of security and safety, and even helps build their self-esteem. And it establishes mutual respect for each other if you communicate in a healthy way, in a respectful way with each other. And ultimately, you're teaching your children how to communicate for future relationships. You're setting the tone for what that communication will look like for them as young adults and adults as they enter into not only romantic relationships, but friendships as well. It's important that they know how to communicate in a healthy way. So of course we have our daily communication, and that kind of sets us up for success when there is conflict. So let's talk about what healthy communication looks like for a family. So I know we're all really busy. We're all going from one thing to the next, especially as sports pick back up and kids start going back to school in the midst of COVID, that we're all just kind of getting busier, kind of getting back to a little bit more of normalcy. So I think it's so important that one, you schedule that family time and whatever that looks like for your family, whether that's a weekly time you set aside or you set aside, different bits of time on a daily basis, but making sure you're engaging as a family on a regular basis and prioritizing that time, that nothing is going to take away from that, short of an emergency, that's kind of your sacred time together. And really set aside time each day. And that doesn't have to be a lot of time, just a little bit of time each day to engage with your children, check in and see how they're doing. And if at all possible, eat meals together. That's a great way to find out how their day went and be engaging with each other together as a family. And I know for us, sometimes it's a struggle, especially with a 13-year-old daughter. She doesn't always want to engage. But there are some ingenious ways to do that. There's conversation starter games, which I know we got an eye roll the first time we brought that out, but they she really does engage when we bring up things in these conversation starters. There are free versions of that on Pinterest, or you can even purchase those on Amazon, whatever you prefer. It just kind of gives your family different topics to engage on as you're eating dinner, if you have a child who is hesitant to engage with you. Also, a family calendar system, especially as families are busy, being able to communicate with each other on a practical way, as far as who has appointments when different games starts, or you have different practices, just so everybody is on the same line of knowing what is going on each single day, especially as kids are older and maybe have their own smart devices, that they can also have the family calendar as well. Everybody can add their own schedule into there, so you guys can be on the same page. And ultimately, staying connected through technology. And I'm sure it's something you guys are already doing, but I know sometimes technology gets a bad rap, but it can be such a great tool for us to stay in contact with each other, especially as you have busy parents who maybe are traveling. I know when I travel, I really value being able to FaceTime with my daughter, even just be able to stay connected while I'm gone, a week at a time, to be able to FaceTime, show her where I'm at, show him what I'm doing, so she can feel like I'm not as far away. That is just a great way to stay connected. But even something as simple as sending an email to your kid when they're, at school. If they, they have something hard coming up that day, send them a little bit of encouragement, let them know you're thinking of them. And they might not be able to reply back to you, or maybe they can just read it real quickly, but just them knowing that you care about them and you're able to reach out and connect with them is a great way to just kind of build on those healthy communication and build that relationship. Ultimately, you want to be available to them. I talked about that daily check-in. And again, that doesn't have to be, a big, long, drawn-out session, finding out what they did that day, every single detail, but just taking those few minutes to check with them, see how, their day went, asking those open-ended questions. That really sets the basis for your communication with them, letting them know that you care about them. And be distraction-free if at all possible. Turn off the TV, put down your phone, make eye contact. If you can, stop what you're doing and just take those few minutes. Again, it can just be 5 minutes or less. See how they're doing, and really just reading their body language and being engaged in what they're talking about. And I know about you, sometimes that can be difficult, especially if they're kind of droning on about something that maybe isn't interesting to you. But taking interest in what they're interested in is going to help them connect with you and see that you really care about what they're talking about. And ultimately, you need to know how your child communicates. If your child are they really chatty, or are they really reserved? Do they want to be able to share everything as soon as they walk through the door? Or do they need that time to decompress and have alone time? Picking up on those things and observing how they interact when you try and engage will be so helpful. Because if you try and engage a reserved child who needs to decompress as soon as they walk through the door, you're probably not going to get much out of them. But giving them their alone time, maybe they need some time in their room to work on some homework before you try and engage them, you will probably get a lot better results and actually getting real answers from them and real connection with them once they've had that time to decompress. And some of that's just kind of testing out and seeing what works for your child and how they're going to engage. And ultimately, just spending time together can encourage them to open up and talk with you. Just spending that time, whether you're doing something that's interesting that they really enjoy, maybe you're just taking a walk with them, walking the dog, just having time together, they will eventually open up and communicate with you. And ultimately, we need to be a good listener, right? We're not the only ones talking. We need to be able to listen to what they're saying, ask them what their thoughts and feelings and opinions are on different topics. Especially as they get older, they can get really opinionated, and we want to know what their opinions are, which doesn't always mean we agree with them, but just listening to them and listening without judgment or criticism, and ensure you're actually listening and observing them as well. Really looking at body language is so important when they're speaking, so we can really understand what they're saying. When we're not making that eye contact and not reading their body language, we may be missing out on a huge part of communication when they're speaking with us. And of course, always allow them to vent their feelings, even if maybe we think it's something that's not as important. Maybe they're overreacting about something. To them, it's a big issue. So just allowing them to vent about what's going on is really important for them and really builds that connection. And then use door opener statements to encourage them to expound on their feelings or what's going on. So does anybody know what door opener statements are? Have you ever heard of them? Looking over here on my chat, see if anybody has an answer for me. All right, so door opener statements. Yeah, so it's like an open-ended question. It can be very much a question or it can just be a statement. And I'll go on to some examples, but it's really just setting the stage for letting your child know that you are available to listen to them and that you are interested in what they have to say. So simple examples would be like, I'm here if you need to talk. I see that you might look, that you look really upset. I'm here for you. Or tell me more about that. That sounds really interesting. Those kinds of statements to help them engage. And it doesn't always have to be something negative. It doesn't always just mean that they're upset. It might just mean they want to talk about a book they've been reading, but letting them know you are available for them, just kind of those kinds of statements. And they can definitely be questions as well. And ultimately, we want to be a good role model. How do we communicate? Really look, do some internalization and say, how am I communicating with my child, with my spouse too? And then am I being a good role model to healthy communication for them? And that's difficult, right? We're not perfect people, and we're definitely going to be, make mistakes, but really just being intentional on how we communicate is the best practice. Use tones and words that you want them to use, especially in front of them. We don't want to use words that we don't want them to use. We want them to use appropriate language. So we want to model that behavior for them and really describe what you're feeling. Put a label on the feelings that you have. Let them know feelings aren't bad. So whether you're feeling angry or happy or sad or disappointed, label those feelings, especially for younger children who may not be able to express those things very well yet. You being able to label those things for them, for yourself, can help them model that behavior later on. And really be sure you don't send any mixed messages to your kids as well. Don't laugh at something that you don't want them to do. That's really confusing to them, and it'll actually reinforce that negative behavior. And I know that that's hard, especially kids are funny, even when they're naughty. So that can be difficult to do when you're trying to correct them, even though they're being hilarious. But take that time to set aside to laugh with your spouse later, but don't laugh while you're telling them not to do a certain behavior. And use no sparingly. And I know maybe that sounds counterintuitive, right? We don't want to raise spoiled, entitled kids, but no can actually lose its meaning when used over and over and over again. And kids start tuning us out for sure. So I would redirect and encourage the good behavior that you want to see. So focus on what you want them to do instead of not do. So say yes when possible. And that maybe sounds crazy because we don't want to be overindulgent, of course, but we want to set them up for success. Help them use their thinking skills. Give them possible consequences. So you could say, yes, but here's the possible consequences. And I'll give you an example. So my child wanted to dye her hair green. Apparently that's a new thing. So I said, okay, yes, but here are the possible consequences. For one thing, you're going to have to pay for it. Two, it's very costly to upkeep, and you're going to have to continually pay for it. And three, as it fades, what is that going to look like? Is that going to be the color you really want? And then four, do the research. How much research what that's going to look like. What if you don't like it? How do you fix it? What's that process going to look like? So I kind of gave her the tools to say, okay, here's for your guidelines of you're going to have to save up for all this, do the research, and now come back and tell me if this is something you want to do. She did quickly change her mind. Would I have allowed her to do it? Yeah, because ultimately to me, dyeing your hair isn't a big deal, but there will be, some possible natural consequences if she doesn't end up liking those things. So give your children the opportunity to make some of those decisions that aren't going to be, a safety risk or against your values or morals, because that's where real learning takes place, when they have the opportunity to kind of do that kind of research and see what consequences will look like. And it shifts the responsibility from you as a parent to really the consequences of their choices and behaviors. And it really ultimately improves your parent and child relationship together and giving them some element of control when possible. And it teaches them responsibility. So they have to own up to their own process and the outcomes. Had she dyed her hair green and not liked it at all, it would have been a result of her decision from that process. So again, just an opportunity for them to learn real life decision-making skills, but in the safety net of your home and parenting. Yeah, fill them out for their boundaries for sure. And they have to know like what their boundaries are. So use more do instead of don't. So that's along the same lines as far as using less no's and more yeses. Again, focusing on don't doesn't promote the positive behaviors you want to see, and don't can actually reinforce the negative behavior. So instead reframe them to focus on what you want them to do instead of not doing. So instead of saying, no, you can't go outside because it's too cold, you're going to focus on, no, let's stay inside and play because it's too cold to go outside. Instead of saying, don't color on the walls, you would use, we color on paper. So again, it's all about reframing. You're still, kind of showing them what to do instead of saying, don't do this one behavior. Really focusing on what you want that child to be doing really sets the tone. It's a really positive discipline in getting the behavior that you want to see. And then talk with your child, not at your child. How many of you sat through probably, I don't know, countless lectures from your parents? I know I did. Parenting has kind of evolved a little bit since the time that I was a child. We're kind of getting away from less of barking and lecturing at kids and more of like engaging in two-way conversation. I think really focusing on engaging them when possible and giving choices when possible. And not everything is going to have a choice. But for instance, instead of barking out a list of orders, you might consider, okay, you need to clean your room, fold the laundry, and take out the trash. Which ones of those do you want to do first? Those things, as long as they get them done, most of the times those things it doesn't matter what order they do them in, right? But giving them some element of control and picking which one they do, one helps give them some element of control, helps them build some respect for you and respect for each other, but also entails them, building those decision making. So when you're talking with your child and not at your child, that involves both talking and listening. Giving them the opportunity to have their own say in things, again, when possible. Not every situation does that fit, but I think when possible, giving, especially as kids get older, letting them state their opinion on how things should be done, I think is valuable. And you're helping them practice building that healthy relationship and communication in the future by letting them engage in a healthy, respectful way with you as a parent. And it allows them to see that their thoughts and feelings are important. When you talk at someone, it really conveys what they say, what their feelings are or their opinions are not important. So we really want them to know that they are valued and their opinion is important. Again, not only does we don't always do what they want, but being able to hear their opinion, I think, is important for sure. And then use I statements. I'm sure many of you have heard this when you've taken or read anything about communication with a partner. And the same could be said for, communicating with your child. You want to avoid using statements such as, you're messy, you're too loud, you're such and such. You want to use I statements to say how that behavior is impacting you. So instead of saying you're messy, you would say, I need you to put away your belongings. Or you're too loud becomes, I need you to be a little quieter, I have a headache. So you're really kind of just changing up how you're saying it. You're still communicating the same message, but how you're saying it is so much more respected and responded to. And it allows your child to take responsibility for their behavior when you're pointing out the behavior that's going on instead of saying you. And definitely it conveys what is expected for them to correct. So as far as when you need to make a request of your child, make sure you make it important. You want to be very specific on what your request is. If you're vague, they won't engage in that. You need to be really clear on, what it may be. So if you want them to, okay, I need you in 5 minutes, I need you to put your video games up and start cleaning up for dinner. Be very specific on what your expectation is, or else they may ignore you. If you just say, hey, in a few minutes, or hey, in a little bit, they might not understand that. Set a timer, let them know, hey, when this timer goes off, this is when you need to be done, and be very specific in that. And make sure you have their attention. Make sure you have eye contact, especially if they're engaging in play. They're probably not going to hear you if you don't make sure you have eye contact. So make sure you call their name, make that eye contact with them, reinforce that, hey, you've heard what I said, correct? So make sure you're speaking firmly, give them the reason for the request, and making sure you engage them. So an example would be, hey, John, I need you to put your books away on the table because it's time to eat dinner and there's no space to eat. So you're being very clear on what you need them to do, and that why you need them to do it. And ultimately, we want to use kind language with our kids, and that helps create a healthy relationship and a good communication. When we use kind words, kids have a better self-esteem. Things like "I love you" are never used too much, right? Making sure you let them know, hey, it's okay you had an accident. It's okay you spilled whatever. It's okay, accidents happen. Let's clean it up. Really reinforcing positive behavior, saying things like, thank you for being so helpful today. Thank you for playing nicely with your sibling. Making sure we're reinforcing the behavior that we want to see. We want them to know they're accepted. Kids are going to make mistakes. They're going to misbehave. They're going to ignore us. They're going to throw temper tantrums. And that is all a part of their growing and development process. And we want them to know that they are loved and accepted, even if their behavior isn't aligning with what we want them to do. Of course, we want to correct the behavior, but we want them to know they are loved and accepted no matter what. Kids who are loved have higher self-esteems. And a kid with higher self-esteem is more likely to get along with others. It all impacts each other. So accepting your child doesn't mean you're accepting the behavior, but just letting know that they are loved, and communicating in a way that doesn't cause them shame. Threatening, demanding, or lecturing behavior really makes children feel like they can't do anything right. Again, focus on behavior you want to see instead of constantly condemning behavior that you don't want to see. It's all about reframing and acknowledging things your kids struggle with. Maybe suggesting ways for them to handle it. Maybe they struggle with, getting up on time. Okay, let's brainstorm of ways to improve that. Or maybe they struggle with, playing video games too much, wanting to go over screen time. Brainstorm ways to help them with that and work on it together instead of in a condemning or lecturing way. All right, so how did your parents communicate with you? If you feel like sharing, if you want to come on audio or write in the chat. And I know I was saying earlier, it's changed so much. I think I'm kind of what parenting looks like maybe now versus 20, 30 years ago. If we get any responses, how did your parents communicate with you? I know for me, there was a lot of lecturing, right? Talking at, maybe not engaging with. So, Angela, did you have something?
Yeah, I was going to say I was definitely talked at. My opinion really never played a role in anything that, was kind of going on. And it was definitely more of a lecture. I just kind of had to sit there and grin and bear it.
Right, absolutely. Not a lot of asking of opinion for sure. I think as I got older, there was a little bit more of that, but definitely as a school-age child, not so much. So Laura, you had very open communication in your home. You got your share of lectures, but they let you talk to you. Good. And I think, when we know better, we do better, right? And as parenting styles and different communication information comes out, I think, parents are just engaged more and different discipline techniques than perhaps, decades ago. So very good. I'm glad you sound like you had a really good communication in your home, Laura.
Yeah, I'll unmute and kind of clarify that a little bit. Even like with the lecturing, I think it was very much with the intention of teaching and like even in discipline. And I read something else somewhere this morning that the goal of discipline is to teach, like the root words of that is to teach. So I feel like even in the what I'm coming across as lecturing was, them actually teaching and then us being able to have discussions about that so that it was learned from. I hope that makes sense.
Absolutely. And it's a perfect segue to where we're going. So we're actually moving on to communicating during conflict and or discipline, however you want to word that. So perfect that you kind of segued that for us. So daily communication, that can be kind of easy as long as you're intentional about, setting aside time for your kid each day. That's kind of more on the easier spectrum. But communicating during conflict or while you're disciplining your child can be really difficult, especially when they know how to push your buttons, right, and kind of send you over the edge. So I think one technique to really help set the stage for healthy communication, either during conflict or discipline, is to really make sure you set your limits before you get angry. So what does that actually mean? Like really setting clear boundaries and expectations with your kids so they know, hey, here's what my mom and dad expect of me. Here's what my guidelines are for screen time. Here's what my guidelines are for when I should be getting my homework done. Here's what my chores are. Setting those clear expectations before there's a conflict, so they know the minute they cross the line, there's going to be a reaction. There's going to be a consequence of some sort, so that they aren't taken aback. So they know clearly that this is the boundary. This is the rule, and reinstate and reinforce those rules on a regular basis before things get out of hand. Don't be that, don't parent from the couch, so to speak, right? Kind of letting them escalate and escalate and escalate, get away with more and more and more until you finally can't handle it anymore and explode. That's not what we want to do. We want to constantly reinforce those rules so they know clearly what the boundary is before things get out of hand. It can sometimes be easy to sit back and kind of let things linger, let them kind of get away with more and more, and then suddenly you've reached your high water mark. But if we're more proactive, I think we'll get better results in reinforcing those rules as we go instead of letting things get out of hand. So ultimately, when you are disciplining or, addressing issues with your kids during conflict, you want to make sure, of course, utmost that you keep calm. Take a few deep breaths before you engage in the conversation with them. And if you need to wait longer, it's okay to take a time out and say, hey, I need to step away for a few minutes. I need to take a time out before we talk about this, especially when they're really serious issues that maybe have pushed your buttons and, maybe you're not quite in control of yourself yet. Take that time, step away. Of course, you want to communicate with them that you're stepping away. And ultimately, I know this sounds silly, but find a way to smile when you step away. That can actually discharge the tension from your brain and sends a message to your nervous system to calm down. You'll feel silly doing it, but it'll help break that tension and send a message for your nervous system. And ultimately, if you can't calm down, if none of those things work, put on some music and dance. Again, may sound silly, but it does work. Again, just another way to break that tension, get your brain out of that kind of adrenaline rush that's going on when you're angry, and help you calm down before you can address your child. Ultimately, be proactive and practice mindfulness on a regular basis. That can actually help you build the capacity to calm yourself when you are in the midst of anger and feeling out of control. practicing that mindfulness on a regular basis. It's kind of like a muscle. The more you do it, the more in control you'll be of it. So things like yoga, meditation, those kinds of things, prayer can all help us kind of be able to maintain that calm when we need to kind of call on that muscle again to calm down. And acknowledge your feelings. Anger is not a bad thing, right? We all have a spectrum of emotions, and those are in a normal, healthy emotion to have. But look at what the root of the anger is from. Are you actually afraid of something? Are you sad? Are you disappointed? Kind of identify what it is you're actually feeling underneath kind of the layer of anger. And make sure you don't yell, threaten, or give the silent treatment. That is not going to be effective communication for how your child's actually going to listen when you're engaging and kind of correcting the behavior. So yelling, I know that was a popular thing in my house, a learned behavior that I've had to unlearn myself. So why do we do it? Why do we yell? It's usually rooted in fear. We're usually afraid of something, whether that's losing control, not having all the answers. You're afraid of your kid getting hurt. And sometimes you do have to yell, right? Sometimes you need to like get their attention, especially if it's the middle of a safety issue. They're getting ready to run out in front of a car. You're going to have to yell and get their attention. Sometimes it's the fear of being in chaos. What would be some other fears you can think of that would be a reason that you would be yelling? What about the fear of embarrassment, right? Or being judged, being a bad mom, being a bad dad. You're in the grocery store and your kid's acting up. I've been there, right? Fear of embarrassment. Or the fear you're like not a good parent. Or that your kid's going to turn out entitled, right?
Definitely.
Yeah. And I know, like the kind of that fear, you're like, man, I want you to listen. I don't want you to turn out to be an entitled, dysfunctional adult. I need you to listen to me. So really, I think that's a lot of where that comes from. It's just that fear of, especially looking at being a bad parent or failure. Yeah. Thank you, Laura. So here's some ideas to use instead of yelling. It might be, I need your help. For example, I'm feeling overwhelmed and angry. I don't want to yell. I need your help. Here's what I need you to do. Or I'm going to take some time to calm down. So I can feel myself getting really upset. I'm going to go to the bedroom, calm down for a few minutes, and then we'll talk about this. Or just acknowledging your feelings, saying, I'm feeling angry, and that's okay. It's a normal, healthy emotion. Or freeze, right? Like they're in the middle of the parking lot getting ready to run out in front of a car. I tell them to freeze. Identify that that's the word you want that you're going to use when you need them to stop moving, especially when you have younger kids. And again, for safety issues, we're going to have to sometimes say that loudly and clearly for them to hear it. But all right, so we want to refrain from labels and name calling as well. Any kind of ridiculing, shaming, name calling behavior is not helpful for them and can really lead to a dysfunctional parent-child relationship. Really leads to a negative self-view and low self-esteem for your child. So we don't want to say things like you're acting like a baby or you're embarrassing me. Those kinds of things are not helpful. And it's really, kind of identifying them as themselves instead of identifying the behavior that you want them to change. And so it's not going to be helpful in actually correcting the behavior. So you really want to identify the behavior that's going on, identify how you're feeling. You want to deal with the present behavior, not rehashing previous behavior. So not going back to what they did last week or last month, or just really focusing on what's happening today and being very specific about the behavior you want to address. So when you're disciplining, you never want to do it while you're angry. So if you've already talked through what's going on and you're still angry, and you're getting ready to discipline, make sure you still take that time to calm down. Again, you need to wait for your spouse to get home, or maybe you need to say, hey, I still need some time, and then we'll address the discipline or the consequences or what's going to go down after we have talked through the issue. Again, don't rehash it again. Don't work yourself up again. about what's going on, and you want to ultimately avoid physical force if at all possible. There are many of other discipline techniques, and we'll go through talking about those in a few minutes. So when you're considering what discipline methods to use, there are some questions to ask yourself. So is the discipline related to the behavior? Is it actually teaching my child something? Is it going to actually encourage the behavior to change to what the behavior is I want to see? Does it actually help create a connection between my child and myself? Or is it creating a disconnection? And does the discipline fit the child? So is it going to be appropriate for that specific child? There's going to be different discipline techniques that are going to be helpful for different kids, right? What works with one kid isn't going to work with another one. Does this teach my kid to actually learn how to take responsibility? And can my child separate from who they are versus what they did? Is that going to help them differentiate with this discipline technique? And can you actually follow through with it? So, for instance, if you're telling your 5-year-old you're going to, ground them from going to grandma's, that might be difficult to follow through with. Or you're going to take away, not allow them to read. That's probably going to be difficult to follow through with, and probably something you don't want to follow through with. So again, just making sure that you are very clear on what discipline that you want to use, and making sure it's something that's practical and being able to follow through with.
Plus, you may need the time away for them to go to grandma's house.
Very, very good point, right? Like we don't want to use discipline that's going to be harmful for us as parents too. We definitely need time away as well. Yeah. So consequences are really in discipline kind of one and the same word. Definitely, just as Laura said at the beginning of this section, that really the intention is really to teach them how to do the behavior that we want to see, right? To really reinforce that positive behavior and let them know the negative behavior is not okay. So we want to clearly define the terms, make sure the consequences are age appropriate, and give immediate consequences when possible. When we delay consequences, especially with younger children, they really struggle to make the connection with why they're getting that discipline. Or if it's really lengthy, especially with a younger child, they're not going to know. If, for instance, if you say, I'm going to ground you for 4 weeks and they're 6 years old, by the end of that 4 weeks, they're not even going to remember what happened. So making sure that it's logical for them as their age and for what that behavior occurred. So positive discipline techniques are really good techniques to utilize. And if you're not familiar with the work by Dr. Jan Nelson, please, look into her website, look into her books. They have great information on really focusing on that positive behavior, reinforcing positive behavior that you want to see as a parent. And these methods are taken from her website, and you can find all that information here. It goes into a lot more detail as far as what positive discipline techniques to use. So one of them is natural consequences. Have any of you heard of natural consequences, or could give me an example of what a natural consequence is?
So I would say you tell them not to run, in the house or whatever. And sorry, I'm walking. And because of running, they didn't listen to the rule. They end up falling, scraping their knee, whatever. That's kind of a natural consequence.
Absolutely. So it occurs without any parental interference at all. Definitely something like, you've already given them the boundary and they decided to not follow that, right? So you're not going to interfere. You're going to kind of let nature take its course, so to speak. But in doing so, you want to make sure when that natural consequence occurs, for instance, they fell and scraped their knee, the example Angela gave, you want to avoid using, I told you so. I told you this was going to happen when I told you not to do it. Instead, show empathy and understanding, be supportive, but don't rescue them. Let them know, oh, I'm so sorry that happened. But don't rescue them from that natural consequence, and validate their feelings. Of course, we don't want to always use natural consequences. There's a time and place. Of course, if safety is an issue, we don't want to use it then. Or if it interferes with the rights of somebody else, we don't want to use natural consequences. or if they're not going to make the connection. For instance, if their child's behavior doesn't seem like a problem to them, but it will affect their health and well-being, we don't want to use natural consequences. For instance, if you have a child who doesn't see that not brushing their teeth will be an issue, right? They think, I don't care if I don't brush my teeth, but we know it's going to affect their dental health. We don't want to allow natural consequences to occur. So, an example might be, beyond what Angela said about scraping your knee. Another natural consequence might be, I've told my daughter to save up money for going on a vacation so she would have souvenir money. And instead of saving up, she spent all her money. Well, natural consequence is going to be she's not going to have money for souvenirs. So what's going to happen? She's going to be disappointed when we go on vacation and she doesn't have any money. She's going to feel disappointed. She's going to be hurt. She's going to be upset. So I'm going to acknowledge, sorry that happened. Sorry that you have spent all your money. But the natural consequence is going to be she doesn't get any souvenirs, right? So I'm not going to rescue her by giving her money. I'm going to allow the natural consequence of her not saving her money to occur. So again, in lessons learned, I think kids can really learn from natural consequences. Hopefully next time she would learn then to save her money, to budget for things in the future, instead of having immediate gratification and spending her money, in the immediate time. All right, let's move on to logical consequences. So logical consequences, we would want them to be related. So it's going to be related to the behavior. It's going to be respected. So the consequence does not involve blame, shame, or pain. It's going to be reasonable to both the child and the adult. It's going to be helpful rather than hurtful. And most importantly, logical consequences don't fit every situation. There's going to be a time and place in which logical consequences would make sense. So does anybody have an example of what a logical consequence would be? Say, for instance, your child is refusing to, put away whatever game they're playing, video games. I keep using video games. So it's the one that keeps coming to my mind. You've told them time and time again, put up their video game, time is done, has become a reoccurring issue. The logical consequence would be then to ground them from the video game, to take the video game away. That would be a logical consequence. You're taking away whatever it is that they are not complying with. It could be video games, it could be toys, cell phones, smart devices, whatever it may be that they're not complying with. That would be the logical consequences, removing that item from them for X amount of time. So whether it's for the day, for the week, whatever, it would be dependent, of course, on the child's age, maturity level, how often that's occurred, and you as a parent would decide, of course, what the timeline for that. That would be a logical consequence. And then the third category for positive discipline is focusing on solutions. So this is where you're going to brainstorm together to come up with ways to solve the problem. It really helps motivate your child to be a part of the solution, and it motivates them to actually do what you're asking when you're engaging them and being a part of the solution. Because ultimately you want to ask yourself, are you looking to blame them for the behavior, or are you really looking for solutions? Are you really looking for them to do what you're asking them to do? So identify the problem with them, and this sometimes could even be a whole family affair depending on what's going on. You and your partner are focusing on with the individual child, depending again on what the behavior is. So identify the problem, brainstorm solutions. Everyone together is going to pick one solution, and then you're going to try that solution out for a week. After a week goes by, you're going to see if that resolution actually worked to solve that problem. And if it didn't work, you're going to pick another solution and start all over again. So I know one example that I have is actually, Angela, you did this very similar thing with your daughter, I think very recently, with the issue with her getting up in the morning. And I think it was great. I don't know, Angela, if you have time and want to share about what your solution was.
Yes, because it was perfect. So every morning for school, I go to get Ashlyn up for school, and she fights me. So she is very much my daughter. She is me, just in a miniature version. And I hate mornings, so does she. So we talked about, how can I get you up where we're not fighting every morning? And initially her thing was, well, wake me up with music. I'm like, okay, I can do that. So the next morning I get up and I turn music on, and her immediate reaction was, turn that crap off. And so, of course, I try not to laugh. But we ended up coming up with a solution of getting her an alarm clock. So now she gets up to an alarm clock, and it's worked perfectly so far. And every morning I hear her alarm clock go off. I lay in bed waiting to hear if she's going to get up or not. And she has been able to get herself up without my assistance for about a week now.
Woo, winning. And I know as a parent, like that's probably one of the most difficult times is early morning, trying to get your kids up and ready to go so you can get out the door. I know for my daughter, we have a similar issue, not a morning person, neither am I. One thing that she wants to be able to snooze, so to speak. She wants to be able to be woken up early so she has time to lay there and wake up. She is not somebody who's going to bound out of bed. And I'm the same way. I actually do that myself. I purposely set my alarm early so I can snooze. And she wanted the same ability. She didn't want to have to jump right out of bed as soon as I told her it was time to get up. So I actually wake her up a half an hour early, and she prefers it. And so that means when she gets up, finally, when she gets up, she does have to get ready quickly, but she complies and does it. So just really working on with your kids, coming up with solutions, especially for ongoing issues like that they're struggling to do. Helping them be a part of the process, I think it really engages them and makes them want to comply. Yes, I love snooze too, Angela. All right, so ultimately remember, discipline is there to actually encourage the behavior you want to see, to actually teach them how to behave in a positive way. And regular communication with your child is going to help them come to you when there's a big issues that they need help with. If we don't keep that regular communication up and engaging them, they're not going to come to you when there are big issues if you haven't been paying attention and engaging previously. And ultimately, you're helping them to shape their communication skills for their future partners, future relationships, future friends, coworkers, employers, helping them communicate in a positive way, setting that tone now will really be beneficial to them. But ultimately, remember, none of us are perfect. We're going to mess up. We're going to yell. We're going to, not parent in a perfect way, and that's okay. I think just really being intentional about, being a positive role model for your kids, even if we aren't perfect. I think it's going to help us all get a long way, and just setting those intentions on how we want to engage with our kids. So hopefully you all have learned or gotten some refreshers on how to communicate in a healthy way with your kids. Here are a few resources for you as well. We have our Brigade FAP phone number up there. There also is Military One Source. You can get family counseling through the Military Family and Life Counseling Program virtually on their website if you want to give them a phone call or engage with them through their website as well. And then here is the website for the positivediscipline.com that I shared information with you guys about earlier. And then there's also a book by Dr. Jane Nelson, Positive Discipline. There's various ones of those out from her, but Positive Discipline was her first one. But take a look at those. And then How to Talk So Your Kids Will Listen and Listen for Your Kids Will Talk is a classic communication book for parents as well that I highly recommend. And then we have a survey. If you guys want to take our survey, I'll put the link. Maybe if the link will paste in there. For you guys to take in the chat, if you don't mind to share with me how I did today and ways I can improve. We're always looking to improve the classes that we offer, so please take that for us. And then very last but not least, we have lots of classes coming up. If you would like another virtual class that you can attend live, we have one on April 27th on parenting personalities, parenting to your strength and your child's weakness, parenting to your strength and your child's strengths, and then various on-demand classes on YouTube as well, developing a split plan, saving for college, safe sleep for your baby, child environmental safety, and balancing work and family coming up here this month. So be on the lookout for those as well. Are there any final questions for me as we end this? All right. Well, thank you guys so much for your participation. I really appreciate it. And you all have a great day.